Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Tech 10 Caracal II, one of the Caldari top tier cruisers. Now, once upon a time, the Caracal line of hull was without a doubt the most popular hull in the entirety of EVE Echoes. There was a time when you'd be queued trying to jump into the Jita system, and 200 of the 250 ships parked alongside you would be some variety of the Caracal, either the trainer, the Caracal, or the Navy issue variant. This was such an incredible popular ship that it basically spurred NetEase to nerf medium missiles and the Caracal line of ships side by side, and though the ships themselves have thus fallen out of favour a little bit since then, they're not quite as popular as they used to be, that doesn't mean they're bad ships at all. I don't see the Caracal II being used much at all at Tech Level 10, and that's something I would like to see changed. I'd like to see more people flying this, so I wanted to sit down and do a video talking about how powerful this ship can actually be and how much fun it can be to fly. So, if you enjoyed today's video, please let me know by hitting a like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to make sure you don't ever miss a video, and of course if you do want to go the extra mile to keep me doing what I do, you can check out both my Patreon page and my Redbubble merchandise store, both of which are linked in the description down below. Finally as well, if you do fly the Caracal line of ships, let me know what you get up to with them. I'd love to see some kill mails, I'd love to hear some stories of what kind of stuff you get up to flying a Caracal. And remember, one person every week from my YouTube comment section is chosen to win a month of Combo Omega. 2 more of you are chosen from my Discord as well, so make sure you join there and let me know there too. Anyway folks, without further ado then, let's jump right in to talking about the Caldari Tech 10 Caracal II. The Caracal line of vessels is the Caldari State's attack cruiser hull. It starts down at Tech Level 5 with the Caracal Trainer. This is one of the trainer ships that you can earn and choose as part of the Road to Set Sail beginner tutorials. So if you complete all of the Road to Set Sail, the Caracal Trainer is one of the options there, and it is a very solid option. It allows you to start training into cruisers and into missiles, and missiles of course are going to be a really popular system for a lot of newer players just due to the simplistics of the mechanics of actually firing them. You can then upgrade to the Caracal, also at Tech Level 5, and upon hitting Tech Level 6, you can move into the ever-popular Caracal Navy issue. To this day, even after the nerfs to both medium missiles and the Caracal line itself, the Navy issue does still prove popular amongst PvPers, especially if you equip it with rapid launches. It's able to actually handle a lot of things like faction frigates, destroyers, and interceptors that some of the other cruisers out there aren't quite as adept at. It's no Stabber Fleet issue, admittedly, but it is still a solid option. Once we hit Tech Level 8, we then gain access to the Caracal Sniper. This again is quite a popular ship. It gets good range bonuses, and it actually has a surprising amount of power grid to it as well, which is worth noting. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with the Caracal Sniper, and sadly we don't see the Caracal again until Tech Level 10 with the Caracal II, which of course is the one we're going to be talking about in today's video. Now, the Caracal itself, as a hull, I think is really interesting. If you look at it from above, it has a very traditional kind of space-age angular sci-fi feel to it, and I really appreciate that in the ship. Yeah, okay, admittedly, once you start looking at it in profile, that sort of weird elongated nose at the bottom there does begin to stick out a little, and it's not quite as I would personally like it, but then again, I've been told that to make a Caldari ship more powerful, you need to add more angles to it. That's an old meme from EVE Online, basically. A lot of the Caldari ships got a complete redesign, a visual redesign, around about the same time that they were getting buffs to their actual systems, which then meant that the new Caldari ship designs came out with more angles to them, much more angular designs, less curvy, and got ship statistic buffs at the same time. So basically the running joke is that adding angles to Caldari ships makes them better. Anyway, speaking of statistics, let's move into the attributes and fittings section and talk about what makes the Caracal II tick. First of all, as a Caldari vessel, again, we have that large power grid here, 933 megawatts. That is sizable and gives us a decent amount of movement there to oversize some of our modules, as we'll see later in the fitting section. Our fitting profile here is one drone tube that can launch small or medium drones. That is incidental damage, don't worry about it too much. 5 high slots, 3 mid slots, 5 low slots, and then 3 of each of the engineering and combat rigs. Now the 5 high slots means we do actually have a decent amount of firepower on this ship. 3 mid slots means that we get an average amount of versatility in regards to things like electronic warfare and propulsion jamming, and the 5 low slots is pretty solid for tanking. If you compare that to something like the Bellicose Covert Ops line, those only have 4 low slots, so are a lot more fragile because of it, or again if you're going into PvE, you could use that additional low slot to fit things like a ballistic control unit or other weapon upgrades. It just gives you options is the point. The cargo hold, 1,350 cubic meters, pretty sizable. Cruisers are good for looting as you go. If you're in PvE, for example, you don't have to dock up as frequently. Looking at the defences though, 16,348 does actually look on the lower end of things on paper, and you might be thinking, wait, what? Why is the Caracal of all of them so, like, fragile in its defence? It's not. It has all of its eggs in one basket here. If you look at the shield tank, 5,885, that's almost 6,000 HP just on shield, and that's before we've looked at things like the cruiser defence upgrade skill, which of course is going to exponentially increase that too. The thing about Caldari ships is they don't really bother with their armor or structure. You can see here both the armor and the structure are sitting around the 4,000 HP mark compared to nearly 6,000 in the shield. This means that when you put things like shield rigs that are increasing the size of your shields, you're getting a much larger effect out of that overall in regards to Caldari vessels, and so guess what we're going to be doing later. That shield tank just means you can focus on the shield and just keep that going. There's a lot of HP there to work with. It means if you start taking damage and you're taking more damage than you can heal, it's still going to take a long time to chip through all of it before eventually hitting the armor and structure. And if you can thin your opponent's fleet down in that time, whether it's PvE and you're thinning the fleet or just punching through your opponent's ship, if they don't, if you can bring that damage per second down below your heals per second before they break through the shield tank, which is a very large shield tank, you're probably going to be in a pretty healthy space and able to bring that all the way back up again. Capacitor bank, 2,470 gigajoules with a maximum capacitor recharge rate of 11.07 gigajoules per second is about standard for what we'd expect on a Caldari vessel. It's a bit larger than other ships, but being an attack cruiser, it's still lower than other Caldari options. That's worth bearing in mind here. This is not going to be a capacitor stable ship, and I actually don't mind that. That's kind of the point of a ship like this, is to get in there, hit hard and fast, and then get out. If you're trying to make it capacitor stable, you're going to have a hard time with this, but it doesn't need it, as we'll see later. As we go down to our lock statistics here, we have 7 locked targets, which is standard for a Tech 10 ship. Signature radius 89.1 meters is a bit larger than other cruisers of this type. Certainly that means you're going to be, the opponent is going to be able to lock onto you and hit you fairly easily. And if we come out briefly to go down and actually have a look at the source radius, 267 meters is a very large source radius, which means the Caracal II sadly is quite easy to scan down with narrow resonance scanners. That said though, scanner resolution of 276 means you don't really get to do that in reverse. Your lock time is going to be slower than other cruisers at tech level 10 on the simple fact that scan resolution is a little bit lower than the competition. When it comes to the flight velocity and the agility statistics as well, things don't improve all that much. 243 meters per second is very slow for a Tech 10 cruiser, alongside a pretty high mass and inertia modifier giving us a pretty low agility rating. This thing does not turn or handle particularly well compared to others at Tech level 10. What essentially this means is that you have a fairly slow, cumbersome ship that is capable of kicking out a rather fearsome amount of firepower and holding onto a rather large shield tank. So let's have a look at the trait descriptions as well. First of all, being a Tech 10 attack cruiser, we have that roll bonus of 5 seconds increased damage control activation time. If you're fitting a DCU to a Caracal II, instead of a 13-second activation, it is an 18-second activation. That's 5 additional seconds of incredibly high resistances. In PvP, this can be the difference between life and death. You can activate this early on and make your opponent chip through it all before you bring your shield boost boosters online, or you can use it when your shield boosters fail as a way of trying to keep the rest of your ship alive. Entirely up to you which way around you want to do that. I like to go with it early, just so that I can watch my opponent's face as they open fire and don't manage to dent my HP. Of course, as we said earlier, if you can get your opponent's fleet in PvP, in PvE, down to a point where the DPS is lower than the HPS you have available, then the damage control is going to allow you to basically have 18 seconds of free time in order to try and thin the herd and reduce the amount of damage you're taking. So it does have uses in PvE as well, although most people would consider the DCU to be primarily a PvP module. Once we look at the skill bonuses though, we start to see the Caracal really come into its own. Starting at the bottom, we have Advanced Cruiser Command bonus. Each level here gives us 5% flight velocity. Of course, Cruiser Command gives you additional flight velocity anyway, but that additional 25% on top of it all means that 243 meters per second is actually better than it looks. Yeah, okay, you're probably not going to be outpacing a Stabber 2 or a Cinnabal anytime soon, but you are actually a lot more mobile in a straight line at least, than you might think otherwise. If we have a look then, Advanced Medium Missile Torpedo Operation bonus, that gives us 5% additional flight velocity per level, and missile flight velocity that is, and a 6% reduction in missile and torpedo activation time, so 25% additional range to your missiles and torpedoes, and a 30% reduction to the activation time. 30% faster firing missiles is a pretty cool thing to have, and it does give this surprisingly solid DPS for a Tech 10 cruiser. We then have the flight velocity there. That additional range means, well, 25% additional range is actually what the Drake has as its roll bonus. So you can see essentially what that's doing there. It is giving you a lot of additional range with which to either just be to help account for that lower mobility in PvE, or just to apply your damage sooner or for longer against fleeing opponents or on the way into opponents in PvP, for example. Anyway, with all that said and done then, let's jump right into having a look at fitting this thing for different functions. The first fit that I'm going to showcase here is what I refer to as my Real Men Warp to Zero fit for the Caracal II. This is very much a PvP based fit, and it is all about essentially ripping your opponent to shreds before they can finish you off. So, what we have here is a full rack of Pitham C-type medium torpedo launchers. Now, in addition to the damage that they do, obviously with the bonuses from the Caracal II, you're getting about 973.15 DPS in total here. 935 of that is just from those torpedoes. These are fast-firing, hard-hitting, and it's worth mentioning, just because I think a lot of people are confused by this, torpedoes, medium torpedoes, their application is really good. Like, a lot of people think torpedoes are the really terrible application. They're better application than medium missiles, and they're higher damage. Their only disadvantage is the range. But again, with the Caracal II's bonuses to range, we're actually sitting at 14.47 kilometers, which means that's not terrible. And beyond that as well, we're not going to worry too much about the range in this one. We're warping in at 0. Hopefully you've got a friend who has found something, has scouted, has tackled it, and you then warp in on them, warp in at 0, lock down, and just open fire. So of course, because of this, we've gone for a Republic Fleet Warp Scrambler and 2 Stasis Webifiers. That said, you can swap one of these Stasis Webifire for a Narrow Resonance Scanner if you wanted to go solo roaming and try and lock things down that way. Those torpedoes will work surprisingly well even against fast-moving interceptors, especially if you can get the scram and the web on them as you drop in at 0. If you don't quite manage to drop in at 0, or your target just tries to, with their natural flight velocity, run away, we have a micro warp drive here. I've only gone for a scout because I didn't have a meta level 11 version available in my hangar, but you can see there's more than enough power grid to get the meta level 11 version in here, so do so. You can use this to basically ram your ship into 0 if you don't land at 0, and if they try running away, you can actually hold some pretty decent pace with this, which is surprising. For defenses, of course, I've gone for a damage control unit. As soon as the opponent locks onto you and you see a little bit of damage start to be taken, activate that DCU. You can then either start cycling the large shield booster here, or you can wait for that to go for a little bit before then cycling it later. You'll see that is indeed a large shield booster, a GIST C-type large shield booster, a battleship-sized booster there. just to help us keep alive. And you might be thinking, well, that's not going to keep you alive long, Benzie. You've only got 1 minute 8 seconds worth of capacitor. That's why we have 2 batteries. We can activate one of these batteries, and you'll see capacitor increase there is 683 gigajoules for basic, 1093 on activation. So we've got 1093 there, and you can see that the shield boost, the amount of activation here is 360. So if you do the math on that, you can see that you're going to get about 3 to 4 applications out of the battery, at which point you activate the second one. That gives you a whole load of time of running your shield booster without even touching your natural capacitor. Then you have the 1 minute 8 seconds after that. And remember, that 1 minute 8 seconds is also based on the micro warp drive being active, which hopefully it won't be at that point. You should already be at 0, holding them in your clutches and just ripping them to shreds with all of those torpedoes. Now for the rigs here, I've gone for capacitor control circuit, semiconductor memory cell, and ultimately the power grid one, we'll explain this later. This particular fit won't use that. Here I would either go auxiliary thrusters or another semiconductor memory cell or the capacitor control circuit, depending on what you have available. The power grid one there is for another fit I'll be showcasing in a moment. Again, for the standard fit here, for the combat rigs, I've gone for Warhead, Califaction Catalyst, and the Bay Loading Accelerator. This is a standardized fit that I tend to use for this kind of thing, and it will allow you to it keeps that DPS nice and high, followed by a core defense charge economizer, shield booster mount bonus, plus 30%. You can also go for the field extender here. The fact that the Caracal II has such a large shield tank means that the shield extender actually does astonishingly well. 30% additional shield is not to be sniffed at. It's a lot of extra shield when you're looking at the Caracal II. Now, for the nanocore, I've actually gone for the Comet nanocore. This is readily available in the shop. I did a video on the Comet nanocores. You can check out how to get those. Readily available in the shop for, I think it's about £4, £5, nice and easy to get. But again, you can just go straight in for any of the things like the Clear Skies nanocore, if you've got that one handy. There are options that you can use here. If you don't want to spend real money on something, you can go for any of the ones that you would find in the Concord store as part of the Concord pass each time. Ultimately, I tend to go for missile and torpedo damage here because I'm trying to kill them before they kill me, but anything that would improve your survivability with shields, etc. is also a pretty good option with whichever nanocore you happen to use. So that's our first PvP fit, but it's not our only one. If you're a bit more anxious about the whole warping to 0 thing or trying to chase down an opponent, then why not go for a Caracal II kiting fit? This time around we've swapped those medium torpedoes out for the Python C-type medium missile launcher. This gives us a rather awesome range here of 44.94 kilometers. Now this is probably going to require some dedicated tackle as well in order to pull off, so if you've got a friend in an interceptor who can just tackle and hold something in position for you, this is going to work really, really well, because those mid slots, of course, you can only really get one warp disruptor in here. 30 kilometers doesn't quite match our 44 kilometer range, so there are times when you might actually want to outrange your own warp disruptors to stay out of your enemy's optimal range and things like that. Of course, if they're using shorter range weaponry, if you happen to find someone, for example, off the top of my head, using something like a Vigilant that is using snub-nosed railguns, then sitting at the 30 kilometer range and holding it with your warp disruptors is going to work just fine. Now again, up to you, depending on who you have with you. If you're going solo or if you're going on your own, you can go for either 1 or 2 target painters. I've gone for 2 just to give myself that absolutely big boost in case something small shows up on grid. But again, if you've got a friend with you, that might be something they can compensate for. Or if you're solo roaming and you're not worried too much about the interceptors and things like that, you might actually decide to swap this for another warp disruptor and get that additional range and just some additional points on it, so you've got 4 points rather than 2 points. Low slots otherwise are exactly the same as we used before. Large shield booster, damage control unit, 2 C-type batteries in order to hold things together, and a medium micro warp drive to give us a bit more range control. The only thing I would suggest changing here though is actually swapping out this rig, possibly one of the DPS ones, but I'd probably go for the shield rig and changing this for a range rig or even an application rig. A rig that gives you additional explosion velocity is a very useful thing. wing on this, especially if you do come across some of those smaller, faster moving ships, because if we open up the medium missile launchers, you'll see they have a very low explosion velocity of 81 meters per second. The explosion radius being fairly large at 101 meters isn't overly problematic because we've got target painters that can help with that, but we're going to be outside of web range, so it may be worth putting explosion velocity rigs onto the ship in order to help with your application. Again though, if you've got a tackle ship joining you and they are going to be webbing the opponent as well, not such a big issue, but if you're bringing, say, a Condor that's going to be tackling at 60 kilometers in an absolutely hectic orbit, well, yeah, you might want the explosion velocity boost that the rig there can provide. Finally then, we come to my pièce de résistance, PvE Brawling Fit. Again, I like brawling. I like that whole warp to zero and just hold them and hit them until they stop moving. That is my approach to combat, and this does it astonishingly well. Again, we've swapped back to medium torpedo launches in the high slots here, good damage application, very high DPS, and that range of 14.47 kilometers, not too much of a problem in PvE. Not many things are running away from us, which is kind of a key point here. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because the low slots here, we've managed to fit in a GIST C-type large shield booster, 2 of our adaptive invulnerability fields in order to keep our defenses up and our resistances nice and high. I've got a large capacitor battery in here as well. This is why we have that power grid rig 3 that we saw earlier, the ancillary power grid router 3. In order to fit a modified large capacitor battery in there, you might have slightly different skills. If you've got cruiser and battle cruiser skills, for example, you may have a bit more PG than this, and thus can go up to something like even a Republic Fleet large capacitor battery. Wouldn't that be exciting? The other low slot then is a Caracal C-type medium afterburner. Again, just helps us to get into range of our opponent. I don't tend to have the afterburner running all that often in PvE. Once I'm in range and hitting things, this is not a speed tank vessel. You've got a large signature radius, still a fairly low flight velocity. You're going to be taking hits from most things, so I rather lean into the capacitor and the tank and turn off the afterburner when I'm running it. For the mid-slots then, a medium energy Nosferatu. Again, Imperial Navy is the largest I could fit here due to my skills, but if you had either Cruiser Engineering at 5, Expert 5, or you've got Battle Cruiser Engineering skills up as well, at Expert 4 or Expert 5, because those reduce the amount of power grid required for your medium weapons, you may have spare power grid to upgrade this to a Vrykolakus or alongside the battery in the low slots, and it's up to you which way you want to prioritize upgrading those. The optimal range here is 11.13, which is slightly lower than the torpedoes, but that just means I orbit at 10 kilometers, and I know the torpedoes are going to work. It just means the torpedoes, they start applying from 15 kilometers away whilst I approach those final 5 kilometers. Once we are close as well, I have a warp scrambler, which allows me to disable a PvE's target's warp drive, micro warp drive, and of course a stasis webifier, just for slowing them down if they're using things like afterburners. Now this ship does remarkably well. You can clear Tech 10 smalls and mediums, no trouble with this. It will go down to Tech 8 dead spaces on its own as well, so if you want to do Inquisitors, Scouts and that kind of thing, in a Caracal II, you very much can. It has more than enough tank to handle that. It does good DPS, more than a Phantasm would at this sort of training as well, which means you can actually clear these things remarkably quickly. Good tank, good DPS. If you don't really want to fly something like a healer, the Gerstless Pirates healer, then the Caracal II makes an excellent alternative option for that. For PvE, I would argue it is a significantly better option than running a Bellicose 3 Covert Ops. For PvP, though, they're both very different playstyles, and which one you prefer is entirely up to you. I just also really get a kick out of seeing a cruiser like this with that power grid bar at full maximum capacity. Like, there is not a single megawatt there spare with which to cram anything else in. Like, if it had a 4th mid-slot, I couldn't fit another stasis webifier in there. That's just really satisfying to me. Anyway, it's all very well and good me talking about this. How about I undock and actually showcase this one in action? Here we are then in a small Angel Anomaly 10. I was hoping to showcase this in like a Scout or an Inquisitor, but I couldn't find one in the past couple of days that I've been using the Caracal II quite extensively. I've been able to clear them in the past though, you will just have to take my word for it and see how well we do the tier 10 here with no real questions asked. We're coming to wave 4 now, beautiful explosion there as we come into wave 4 of this small Angel 10 anomaly and lock onto everything. So immediately get in on that Gist Tempest so that I'm not flying too far away. I need to maintain that close range. My first target is going to be the destroyers because, well, destroyers of course are hard to hit in inverted commas. I like to start with the small things and work my way up. And you'll see now, if we launch those medium torpedoes, they do a good whack of damage to the Talwar there. Okay, it's webbed as well, but we're taking off at least one of its like bars pretty much every single smack. I think it's 4 or 5 smacks to take this one off the grid. Either way, they are nice, five hits in total. Nice fast application there with the torpedoes as well. Onto the Hound. That is a Hound 3, which I'm sure you're aware of what that thing's signature radius is like, and watch the medium torpedoes still pull it down nice and quickly. Very quickly down it goes. I am going to be taking a 10-kilometer orbit on anything. You can do this actually with auto orbit on if you want to be a little bit more hands-off in your approach to how you do this. For me though, I don't like using auto orbit because I always forget to turn it off, and when I come into a PvP situation, well, I'm busy auto orbiting and not actually doing things properly. Now against the Bellicose here, you can see my drone is actually all the way off in the distance doing the, fighting the good fight on its own as I close the gap with that afterburner. Not too long until I'm in range, suddenly those torpedoes are doing their own thing. And you can see that I just activate the shield booster as and when I need. I use the battery preferably when I can, but there's like 2 activations there to pull my shield all the way back up to full, no problems at all. What I like to do is wait until the battery's off cooldown. I'll take a load of damage on my shield, activate the battery, and then cycle it all back up to 100%. By the time the battery is recharged, you shouldn't have gone through your shields in that full time. It's actually quite crazy how long it takes you to empty your shields. As you'll see here, I just don't take much damage at all. It's a bit, well, not percentage-wise at least. They're still the same hits that I would get on any other cruiser, just percentage-wise, because my shields are so massive, it takes a long time to go through. I'm sitting at 90% shields there, no problems at all. Battery is now off cooldown. Should my shield start faltering lower, I would wait until this is probably even as low as 50%, maybe even lower. Activate that medium battery, activate that large battery, and then use that the additional capacitor boost that is given to just boost all the way back up to 100%. There's a lot of capacitor that gets dumped by that battery that I can just happily use to refill. Ultimately though, you can kind of see how this is going. It's a little bit slower than using a battleship for clearing this kind of content, but the additional mobility allows you to actually roam through space and keep an eye out for things like those Tech 7, Tech 8 Inquisitors, Scouts, Anomalies, Dead Spaces. You can even actually have, if you're in friendly space like I tend to roam around in here, you can even just have like a standard wide resonance scanner available, scan down dead spaces and things like that. And then just jump into those if it's like an ODS 7 or something. I do try to do that as a fleet, though I prefer that kind of thing as a fleet. Scouts and Anomalies I will jump into on my own quite comfortably. Anyway, I think we're coming towards the end of this one. I don't think it's worthwhile. It doesn't add anything particularly extra watching me orbit these last 2 targets and comfortably pull them down when I'm sitting on over 90% shields and only just below 90% capacitor. Yeah, this is a ship that takes a lot of damage, and once you go into those Inquisitors and Scouts at like Tech 8, Tech 7, it will comfortably clear those. No real questions asked. Pull those things down. It's a brilliant source of income, especially since they've reworked most of the blueprints. For me here in Angel Space, that actually gets me things like auxiliary thruster rigs. Yay, isn't that exciting? Anyway, folks, I hope this has been entertaining for you. I hope you've enjoyed watching a Caracal fly. I don't see nearly enough of these things out and around. When I mentioned the Caracal II before, I got a lot of people commenting that, hey, I really like that ship. Is it any good? So here's the video showcasing that, yes, actually, it can be a really solid option. And I would love to hear from folks who are flying this thing a bit more often than I get to. I have so many ships I fly that I just tend to cycle between them. If you enjoy this ship, let me know your fit in the comment section down below. I would love to know how you're flying it, what you're doing with it, and how you're fitting it as well. Anyway folks, thank you for watching right the way through to the end, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!